3 years ago, and every once in a while I kind of feel the presence, but I'm not sure if that's just because you want to. Clint Eastwood had a very rare car worth $4,500,000 sitting in his garage for 58 years. He bought the Shelby Cobra in 1965 for just $7,500 from Carroll Shelby, the famous car designer. When they fixed it up, they found Shelby's cigarette burns on the seats and secret notes under the hood. Rich car fans keep trying to buy it, but Clint refuses to sell. You'll be speechless when you hear the reason why. Oh my gosh, I don't want to break your leg because I'm heavy. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco. From the start, he stood out. He weighed 11 pounds 6 ounces at birth, making him the heaviest baby ever delivered at St. Francis Hospital. The nurses were so amazed that they named him Samson after the biblical strongman. The story even made it into a movie. The local newspaper. It was his first time in public, but he had no idea that he would one day become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. His parents, Clinton Eastwood Sr. and Ruth Runner, were middle-class Californians trying to make ends meet during the Great Depression. His father worked as a steel worker and then as a salesman, and his mother worked in factories when she had to. They gave Clint and his younger sister Jean, who was born in 1934, a stable home, even though they moved around a lot. Eastwood grew up moving around a lot, in search of better opportunities. This made him independent and able to adapt to new situations. By 1940, the Eastwood family had settled in Piedmont, California, a wealthy neighborhood near Oakland. It was an exclusive area where minorities were not even allowed to buy homes until the Supreme Court ended racial housing restrictions in 1948. The family owned several cars and had access to luxuries like a swimming pool and country club memberships, which were things that many families during the Depression could only dream of. He never finished high school, but some reports say he thought about going to college and studying music, but his bad grades made that impossible. Instead, he went straight to work and did a series of hard physical jobs that shaped him into the man he would become. His life took a big turn when he was drafted into the Army during the Korean War and stationed at Fort Ord, where he worked as a lifeguard. While stationed at Fort Ord, some people thought he had a bit of luck on his side. Later, servicemen said they had heard that Eastwood was dating the daughter of a high-ranking officer. If this was true, that connection might have helped him get assignments. His time in the military wasn't all routine tasks. On one trip back from Seattle in 1951, after a secret meeting, he was a passenger on a Douglas Ad bomber that ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean near Point Reyes. He and the pilot swam 2 miles to safety. He wasn't scared after his near-death experience. He was released from the Army in February 1953 and quickly went in a different direction. His introduction to Hollywood seemed like fate. A CBS press release for Rawhide later said that a Universal International film crew was working at Fort Ord when someone saw Eastwood and invited him to meet the director. But not everyone believes that story. Eastwood's unofficial biography, Patrick McGilligan, questions it, and Eastwood's official biography, Eastwood, gives credit to a man named Chuck Hill. Hill, who had connections in Hollywood, was stationed at Fort Ord. When he later met Eastwood again in Los Angeles, he used those connections to sneak him into Universal Studios, where he met cameraman Irving Gliberg and set up an audition with director Arthur Lubin. At 6'4", Eastwood looked great, but Lubin later said that Eastwood had no acting training and didn't do it at all. He doesn't know where to stand or how to say lines, but there's something about him. Lubin encouraged him to take drama classes and helped him get a $100 a week contract in April 1954. The contract didn't bring him instant success. Early on, Eastwood was criticized for being too stiff and speaking through clenched teeth, which would become his trademark. In May 1954, he tried out for 6 Bridges to Cross, but was turned down by director Joseph P. He kept trying, though, and eventually director Jack Arnold gave him his first break with a small part in Revenge of the Creature in 1955. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In 1955, he played a jet pilot in Tarantula, but the part was so short that audiences barely noticed it. It was the kind of part that came and went in an instant. In 1958, he starred in Ambush at Samaran Pass, a Western that he later called the worst Western ever made. The movie was about a group of soldiers trying to survive an ambush, but critics panned it for having a predictable plot and wooden acting, and Eastwood sank lower in his seat the whole time. With every scene, he turned to his wife at the end of the movie. He told her he was done with acting. He was so disappointed that he really thought about giving up. He even considered going back to school or finding another job, but he decided to keep going. That choice changed everything. Soon after, CBS cast him as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide DA, a Western TV show about a cattle drive team. Filming began in Arizona in the summer of 1958, and the show premiered in early 1959. In just 3 weeks, it went to the top of the ratings. Eastwood got steady work and national attention for the first time, and his pay went up to $750 per episode, which was a huge increase from what he was making before. But the job came with problems. He had to work 6 days a week and often filmed for 12 hours a day. It was exhausting, but the attention was priceless. Even though Rawhide made him famous, Eastwood wasn't happy with how his character was written. Yates was impulsive and often naive, which made Eastwood angry. He even called Yates the idiot of the plains. Rawhide's ratings started to drop in 1965, and CBS canceled the show that same year. For many actors, losing a major role would have been the end of their career, but for Eastwood, it was the chance he had been waiting for. He was ready to move on from TV, and Hollywood wasn't giving him the roles he wanted, so he took a chance. That same year, Sergio Leone, an Italian director, was looking for a lead actor for his new movie, A Fistful of Dollars. Big names like Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson had already turned down the part. Leone wanted someone with a quiet intensity, who didn't need a lot of dialogue to command the screen, and Eastwood fit the bill perfectly. When he read the script, he saw something different from the clean-cut westerns Hollywood was making. A world where heroes weren't always good and violence was sudden and brutal. He took the job. A Fistful of Dollars was shot in Spain on a budget of only $200,000. It was a loose remake of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, but instead of a wandering samurai, it followed a mysterious gunslinger who pitted two rival gangs against each other. Eastwood's character, who became known as the Man with No Name, was unlike any Western hero before him. He wore a poncho, chewed on a cigarillo, and let his actions speak for him. The movie came out in Italy in 1964, and no one expected much of it. It became a hit and made $14.05 million worldwide and introduced people to a new type of Western. It also started the spaghetti Western genre, which was grittier and more violent than anything Hollywood had made before. With such a big hit, a sequel was bound to happen. In 1965, a few dollars more gave Eastwood's character a partner in Lee Van Clee's Colonel Mortimer, a bounty hunter out for revenge. The story was longer, the action was more intense, and the world was more fully developed. Eastwood's presence grew stronger, and by the time When the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly came out in 1966, Eastwood was a full-fledged movie star. The third movie in the trilogy, The Ugly, became the most popular. It was about three gunslingers: Eastwood as Blondie, the good guy, Lee Van Clee as Angel Eyes, the bad guy, and Eli Wallach as Tuco, the ugly guy, who were looking for gold buried during the Civil War. Leon's directing style had changed, and Ennio Morricone's score made every scene unforgettable. The final showdown, a three-way duel in a graveyard, became one of the most famous moments in film history, even though the characters were all different. Eastwood became famous because of his movies, but his relationship with Leon wasn't always easy. Leon liked to drag out filming, which often pushed production behind schedule. Leon spoke Italian, which caused problems on set because Eastwood had to rely on translators, and Eastwood didn't like Leon's tendency to give long directions. Despite these problems, their partnership changed cinema. Leon became one of the most respected filmmakers in the world, and Eastwood quit TV for good. John Wayne had spent decades making westerns what they were today. Wayne's cowboys were good people who fought for justice, and he thought westerns should be about honor and the American spirit. Eastwood's movies, on the other hand, showed a world where survival was more important than morals. Wayne hated High Plains Drifter, a 1973 Western that Eastwood directed and starred in. It was dark, violent, and based on a ghostly revenge story. Wayne wrote Eastwood a letter saying that Wayne thought the movie was too violent and cynical and not following what Westerns should be like. He also turned down Eastwood's offer to work with him on The Hostiles, a project that never happened because he didn't agree with Eastwood's ideas about the genre. One of the biggest differences between them was how they portrayed violence. Wayne had a rule that his characters never shot enemies in the back because he thought cowboys should fight with honor. But Eastwood's characters didn't follow that rule. They did whatever they had to do to win. This difference showed the shift. Clint Eastwood became a Hollywood legend when he played Detective Harry Callahan in Dirty Harry, 1971. This wasn't just another cop movie. It came out at a time when crime was going up and people didn't trust the police. People wanted a hero who wouldn't hesitate, someone who would step in when the system failed. And that's exactly what Callahan was. He didn't care about rules or red tape. He only cared about stopping criminals, and some people loved him for it. People liked the gritty realism of the movie Dirty Harry, which was directed by Don Siegel and based on the real-life Zodiac murders. Callahan wasn't like most movie cops. He was tough, persistent, and didn't have time for red tape. But his ways caused debate. Some saw it as a dangerous movie that promoted police brutality, and protesters at the 1972 Academy Awards even carried signs calling it fascist. But the controversy didn't stop the movie's success. It made over $36 million worldwide. It cost only $1 million to make. But there was one scene that made Eastwood famous. A bank robbery had just happened, and a hurt criminal lay on the ground while Callahan stared him coldly with his .44 Magnum. Eastwood said, "You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?" That line became one of the most famous in movie history, and Eastwood did it again 12 years later in Sudden Impact 1983. This time he walked into a diner. During a robbery, he pointed his gun at the last man who stood his ground and said, "Go ahead and make my day." That line wasn't just memorable, it became part of American culture. It was used in movies, TV shows, and even politics. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan used it in a speech to threaten to veto a tax increase, saying, "I have my veto pen drawn and ready for any tax increase that Congress might even think of sending up, and I have only one thing to say." The crowd cheered, and the American Film Institute later put it 6th on their list of the greatest movie quotes of all time. But Eastwood wasn't just known for Dirty Harry, he was also good at westerns. High Plains Drifter, 1973, which came out after Dirty Harry, was one of his first big hits. He played a mysterious drifter who comes to a corrupt mining town and takes brutal revenge. It made $15 million, $7 million at the box office, and was one of the biggest westerns of the decade. Next was The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, in which Eastwood not only starred, but also directed. The movie was about a Missouri farmer whose family is killed by Union soldiers during the Civil War, leaving him with nothing but his wits and the men who killed his family. The movie was a huge hit, making $31 million. It made $8 million on a budget of only $3,700,000. And decades later, the Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry for its cultural significance. In 1979, Eastwood worked with Don Siegel again on Escape from Alcatraz, a thriller based on the real-life prison break of 1962. He played Frank Morris, the mastermind behind the escape. The movie made $43 million and is still one of the most famous prison escape stories ever told. Even in his later years, Eastwood kept pushing the limits in Gran Torino, 2008. He played Walt Kowalski, a Korean War veteran who meets and becomes friends with a Hong Kong teenager. The story was about redemption, but not everyone saw it that way. The movie used a lot of racial slurs, and some critics said it reinforced stereotypes. B. Vang, who played Thao, later said that people often laughed at the insults instead of getting the deeper meaning. Despite the controversy, Gran Torino was a huge hit. It made $269 million worldwide on a budget of only $33 million. Some saw it as an honest look at many people across generations and cultures thought it wasn't good enough, but no one could deny its impact. Clint Eastwood didn't just step behind the camera, he took control of it and never let go. His directing career became just as famous as his acting career, earning him Oscars and shaping modern cinema with unforgettable films. In 1992, he directed Unforgiven, a western that stripped away the myths of the Old West. It told the story of William Money, a retired outlaw who was forced to return to violence. Eastwood played the lead role, bringing a quiet intensity to the part. The movie won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. Eastwood won his first Oscar for Best Director, and Gene Hackman, who played the cruel sheriff Little Bill Daggett, won Best Supporting Actor. The movie changed the way people saw westerns by showing that they could be more than just gunfights and heroics. More than a decade later, in 2003, Eastwood directed Mystic River, a dark and emotional crime drama about 3 childhood friends whose lives were crushed by their violence and tragedy in the movie. Sean Penn played Jimmy Markham, a father who was devastated when his daughter was killed, and Tim Robbins played Dave Bowl, a man who was haunted by a traumatic event from his childhood. Both actors won Academy Awards for their roles, and the movie was nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. It was a raw, haunting story that left people shaking. Then came Million Doll Baby in 2004. At first, it seemed like a normal boxing movie. Hilary Swank played Maggie Fitzgerald, an underdog fighter who was determined to make it to the top. But the story took a sad turn and became a deep look at loss and the right to die with dignity. Swank won an Oscar for Best Actress, and Morgan Freeman won for Best Supporting Actor. Eastwood won his second Oscar for Best Director and was also nominated for Best Actor. The film won Best Picture at the 77th Academy Awards, solidifying his reputation as a director who could tell powerful human stories. Not all of his movies were well received, though. For example, Richard Jewell in 2019 told the true story of a security guard. The movie was criticized for how it portrayed journalist Kathy Scruggs, implying she traded sexual favors for information. Her co-workers and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution demanded this and demanded a disclaimer. Warner Brothers defended the movie, saying it was based on credible sources. Despite the controversy, the movie showed how damaging it is when the media jumps to conclusions. Another movie that divided audiences was American Sniper, which came out in 2014. It told the story of Chris Kyle, a Navy SEAL sniper with 160 confirmed kills. The movie was a huge hit at the box office and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Some critics said it oversimplified the Iraq War and didn't look into its deeper complexities, but regardless of their opinion, it became one of the highest-grossing war movies ever made. Even in his late 80s, Eastwood kept directing movies. In 2018, he starred in The Mule, a movie about an old man who becomes a drug courier. At 91 years old, he directed and starred in Cry Macho in 2021. The movie was based on a 1975 novel and had been in the works for decades, with actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger being attached. But it was Eastwood who finally brought it to life, telling the story of a former rodeo star who has to bring a young boy across the US-Mexico border. The movie got mixed reviews, but it was impressive that Eastwood was still making movies the way he wanted to. Clint, over the years, Eastwood has had at least 8 children with 6 different women, though some of them stayed a secret for decades. His biographer Patrick McGilligan even said the real number might be higher, pointing out that one child was reportedly conceived while Eastwood was still in high school. His first marriage to Maggie Johnson in 1953 was troubled from the start, and Eastwood had several affairs, including one with Laurie Murray, who he placed for adoption. No one knew about her until 2018, when she went to a family event with Eastwood at the age of 64. While he was still married to Johnson, he dated stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis for 14 years. They had a daughter named Kimber in 1964, but the public didn't know about her until 1989, when the National Enquirer broke the story. In 1975, Eastwood started dating actress Sandry Lockach while also having 2 children with flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves. Their son Scott was born in 1986, their daughter Catherine was born in 1988, and both birth certificates listed Eastwood as the father, but he didn't acknowledge them publicly for years. He still hasn't confirmed the exact number of his children. So there is still a lot of room for speculation. One of his longest landing relationships was with Roxanne Tunis, whom he met on the set of Rawhide in 1959 and dated until the early 1970 SS. At that time, Tunis was married but separated from Eastwood while he was still with Johnson Kimber. Kimber's birth certificate did list Eastwood as her father, but he denied it in public for years. Reportedly gave her money, but they had some problems in their relationship. Kimber later said that her father had disowned her and even refused to attend her wedding in 1990, but he stayed close to Tunis for the rest of her life. When she died in 2023 at the age of 93, Eastwood was said to be devastated. His relationship with Sandra Locke was one of the roughest. They were together for over a decade and were professionally and personally connected. She was still married to Gordon Lee Anderson, but her real relationship was with Eastwood. She later said he told her he loved her. But while she was away filming Impulse in 1989, Eastwood changed the locks on their house and put her things in storage. Locke was shocked, so she sued him for $70 million in child support, saying he abused her emotionally and broke their promise to support her. The case ended with a settlement. She got $450,000 and a production deal at Warner Brothers, which Eastwood paid for himself when she found out. She later said that her time with Eastwood was a horror story because he manipulated her life and career to keep control over her. Despite everything, she said she loved him deeply, which made the betrayal even harder to accept. After Lockach, Eastwood started dating actress Frances Pfizer. The relationship ended in 1995 when she found out he had fathered 2 children with Jocelyn Reeves while they were together. Pfizer was shocked. She had no idea about the affair. Eastwood married TV anchor Dina Ruiz in 1996. Their relationship lasted longer than most of his others, but by 2013 they were having problems. Ruiz turned to an old friend for emotional support, which led to rumors that both partners were seeing other people. The divorce was finalized in 2014, but the drama in Eastwood's family didn't end there. In 2024, his daughter Catherine publicly criticized her siblings and former stepmother Dena Ruiz on social media. Clancy Eastwood's love for cars began when he was a teenager at Oakland Technical High School. He took auto mechanic classes and worked with engines to learn how they worked. These classes sparked a passion that never went away. Eastwood was often rebellious and would say that all he wanted back then were fast cars and easy women. This may have been exaggerated, but his love for speed and mechanics was real. By the time he was 15, he was already going on solo road trips. He loved driving across California long before he became a Hollywood star. Those early experiences shaped his personal life and later shaped his movies, in which cars often played a major role. His first car wasn't fancy. In 1951, he bought a 1949 Chevrolet panel truck for $25, which is about $260 today. It was more than just a car, it was his home when he was first starting out in Hollywood and struggling to make ends meet. It had a 260 cubic inch Thriftmaster straight six engine that made 90 HP. It had only a few horsepower, which wasn't much for the time, but it worked. Eastwood made the truck livable by putting an old mattress in the back and using movie theater curtains as insulation. The 3-speed manual transmission was hard to use, and he joked that wrestling with it taught him more about patience than any acting class ever could. Decades later, the truck was restored for $65,000 and is still in his collection as a reminder of his early struggles. Eastwood never stuck to one style. Instead, he collected cars from different eras and engineering feats. One of his favorites is a Ferrari 275 GTB, which has a 3.3 LV12 engine with 280 horsepower and is a work of art of Italian design. It's beautiful and fast. But Eastwood doesn't just like European sports cars. He also has a 1977 Pontiac Trans Am Special Edition, which was made famous by Smokey and the Bandit. It has a big screaming chicken decal on it, on the hood, and an Oldsmobile 403 V8 engine. He also has rare Chrysler prototypes that were never made into mass production. This shows how much he loves automotive history. His collection is varied and full of cars that tell a story instead of just sitting in a showroom. Eastwood's love for cars didn't just stay in his garage, it showed up in his movies. The 1972 Ford Gran Torino Sport in Gran Torino became a symbol of old-school American craftsmanship. The car is a symbol of Walt Kowalski's past, his values, and his connection to a world that is disappearing. Eastwood liked the car so much that he bought it after filming was over. Other cars from his collection have also been in his movies, like the Pontiac Trans Am in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. For Eastwood, cars weren't just props. They were part of the story. One of his most famous purchases was when he was in Rawhide in 1965 and bought a Shelby Cobra 427 SC directly from Carroll Shelby. It was a huge deal at the time, but now it's a steal at $7,500. The story behind the purchase makes it even more interesting. Eastwood took Shelby's Cobra for a test drive, and Shelby was so impressed with his driving that he lowered the price by $1,000. But there was a catch. Eastwood had to promise to drive it like he stole it, and he did, spending over 50 track days at Willow Springs Raceway. This wasn't just any Cobra, it was one of only 29 semi-competition models ever made. The SC meant it was originally made for racing but was later changed to be used on the street. It had a 427 cubic inch Ford V8 engine with 485 horsepower, which was a lot of power for the time. The Cobra could go from 0 to 60 mph in just 4.3 seconds and had a top speed of about 165 vh. It was very fast, very light, and barely legal for the streets. What makes Eastwood's Cobra truly unique are the personal touches that Carroll Shelby himself left behind. When the car was restored in the 1990S, mechanics found cigarette burns on the passenger seat that Shelby had used. He saw test drivers push the car to its limits and found handwritten notes from Shelby about how to adjust the cam timing used during testing. There was also Shelby's personal stopwatch and timing sheets from early track runs hidden under the seat. These details made Eastwood's Cobra more than just a rare collector's item. It became a living piece of automotive history. Eastwood has been offered more than $5 million for the Cobra, but he refuses to sell to them because it's not about money. The money the car represents a time when performance was more important than rules, and cars were made for speed and excitement. It's a work of genius by Carroll Shelby, a sign of Eastwood's love for raw power, and a memory of when both men were at the top of their games.